Today, I'm going to be showing you how to make this super cute needle felted rabbit. My name is Charlotte Allen and you've reached my channel, The Felting Alchemist. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking now because I really want us to get stuck into the tutorial, but we're going to be making this faux taxidermy needle felted rabbit head today, and you can really dress it up and make it your own. You know, you can add a crown to it when it's finished, you could add flowers to it, but it's super easy to make and it's definitely achievable for beginners to make it as well. And I'm going to take you through step by step, so let's get stuck in.
Welcome to part one of this tutorial. So the things you're going to need for this tutorial are as follows. You are going to need a ball of core wool that you've washed in the washing machine in a stocking, and I have a tutorial on this in my. You are going to need a ball of core wool, ideally that you've washed in the washing machine. You don't have to do this, but it just really speeds the process up. And there is actually a video on my channel showing you how to create this large ball of wool. Now in the tutorial, I'm using around about 180 grams of core fox sheep wool. You can use any core wool that you want to. This is probably about 80 grams of wool here, so it does really contract in size when you do wash it in the machine. But you're going to need one of these to speed up the process. You're also going to need about 100 to 120 grams of white wool bats. So this is a white Gotland wool bats, but you can use any white wool bats that you need to. Ideally, you want to use something quite nice in quality because we want a nice smooth texture when the rabbit is finished. But you can just use any old white wool bats if you want to. It doesn't have to be anything top notch. You're also going to need about 10 to 15 grams of the flesh coloured merino wool bats. This is a New Zealand wool bats, but it doesn't have to be. You could use a Corriedale or anything like that, as long as it's got this lovely pinky fleshy colour to it. In addition to those wools, you're also going to need some brown wool bats. Now this is a brown Corriedale wool bats, but you can use any wool bats that you need to. This is just referring to the sheep when I say Corriedale or merino or anything like that, but as long as it's a bats, it's absolutely fine. So I've got about 8 grams here, so 8 to 10 grams is about right, and this is going to form the base of our eye for our rabbit. You're also going to need about 8 to 10 grams of brown merino roving. Now I've gone for this kind of chocolatey colour here because this is going to go over this brown wool to create the top of our eye, which is why this doesn't have to be particularly pretty in all honesty. So you need about 8 to 10 grams of this. And then tools wise, you're going to need some fine twisted needles. I've got them in my needle felting pen. I would say for this tutorial, you really do need a needle felting pen because if you're using a single needle, it's going to take you a really long time. So try and get a needle felting pen if you can. You can get them on Amazon relatively cheaply, so it's definitely worth investing in. And then I've also got my medium needle felting pen. I've got 2 medium twisted needles in here at the moment, but keep a third on standby because when we make the eyes, you're going to need that third needle just to assist you in creating the eye socket. You're also going to need a medium dull needle. Now this one came in a pack of 3 from Amazon and it was relatively cheap, so they're definitely worth investing in because you'll find that you use them all the time when you're making things with needle felting, especially things like mobiles or anything that hangs. You want your embroidery scissors. You're going to need a 7 needle multi-tool and a brush mat as well. Now these things are optional, you don't have to use them if you don't want to, but it's all about speeding the process up for you. So now we've covered all the tools and equipment that you're going to need, let's get stuck into part 1 of this tutorial.
Right, so welcome to part 1 of our taxidermy or our faux taxidermy rabbit head tutorial. So the first thing I've done is created this large ball of wool which is going to be the main head of our rabbit, and I've made this by basically filling a stocking full of wool, about 180 grams. And then I've put it in the washing machine. I've tied it off either side, put it in the washing machine at 40, taken it out, and it compacts down and you get this really relatively solid ball-like shape. What I've then done is I've then started shaping it whilst it's still wet with my hands. So pushing the back end onto the table to flatten it off. So we've got a nice flat surface to go against our wool when it's eventually finished. And then I've also been squeezing this bottom half here. This is going to be the bottom half of the rabbit's head, and then this slightly rounder top half is going to be the top of our rabbit's head. So if you want a bit more detail in relation to how you create this ball of wool, there's a tutorial on my channel which tells you exactly what to do. So if you go to that, it'll tell you how to do this, and it should be really straightforward. So the first thing that we want to do for our rabbit's head is we want to create more volume on the lower part of his head. So about halfway up, we want to create more volume and have it sticking out a little bit more. And that's going to create more shape so that when it's hung on the wall eventually, on the side profile, it's going to look really impressive. So I'm just going to spin him round And just push him down a bit, and I'm going to take some white Shetland core wool. Now the bulk of the head has been made with a combination of fox sheep core wool and also lots of bits of wool that I had lying around I didn't really know what to do with, so rather than wasting them and throwing them away, I've put them in the centre of the fox sheep wool and then folded the fox sheep over all the other bits of wool to create the bulk for the head. The reason that I'm not using fox sheep to create the rest of the head is purely because I've run out and it takes a long time to come from Germany. So we're going with Shetland white now, but that's fine because we're going to do a white rabbit head, so it's not a problem. So the first thing you want to do is you want to tear off a reasonably large section of the white Shetland core wool. Tell you what, it's loud out here tonight. There's sheep kicking off and all sorts. It's busy in East Devon. So once you've pulled off your piece, what you want to do is grab a tape measure. There is my trusty tape measure. What you want to do is grab a tape measure, and you want it to be roughly about 15 inches by about 4.5 inches in width. So once you've done that, I'm going to very loosely just fold this over. Doesn't have to be anything massive, and I'm making it so that it's about half the size of the head, okay? So nothing too massive. So I'm just rolling it in like a Swiss roll shape, and then I'm going to place it over the head of my rabbit. And once I've done that, all I'm going to do is take my medium needles and I'm just going to felt that down into place. But what you want to do is have the bulk of the wool sitting as centrally as possible, and then having all the these outer frilly bits dissipating into the rest of the face, so you get this nice smooth transition from the larger part of the head through to the more narrower part of the head, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to hold that into place, keep my fingers out of the way. I'm just going to felt the sides down first, just to lock and anchor them into position. So I've chosen to do this part of the tutorial outside this evening, partly because it's been a beautiful day and it's still lovely and warm outside, and partly because the lighting is a lot better out here than it is in my house. And I want to make sure that you can see as much as possible of this tutorial. And I think sometimes artificial light hinders more than helps and kind of whites everything out. So just go with the nice setting sunset instead. Okay, so I'm just going to spin it round. What you want to make sure is that it's all symmetrical, like I always say. You don't want it to be on the wonk, because then your rabbit will look a bit odd. And then I'm just going to fold the rest of this part down and then felt that into the bottom of the head. And this part of the head is going to eventually look quite square once we've added all the pieces that we need to add. So I'm going to keep felting this down, and I'll come back to you when it's all felted into position. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so I've added the first layer of the white Shetland core wool, and I forgot to say earlier, in terms of measurements for the initial ball that I made, the measurement for the depth of the ball is 10 inches, and that's 10 inches, and then the circumference is, bear with me and I will tell you, the circumference is 18 inches, and then below the width is about 4.5 inches. Okay, so I've added that first layer of the white Shetland wool. What I want to do now is add a bit more, and this time, rather than folding, I'm going to do some layering, and I want to layer a bit more on this top half here to create more depth between the two sections. So I'm just going to take some thick sections and I'm going to place them across this line here where we've already added the Shetland wool, and then I'm just going to layer them on top of each other. So I've got about 4 layers here, and then I'm just going to felt that down into position with my medium twisted needles again. But really focus on getting it up on this part here and not down below so much. So I'm just going to felt that down quickly, and I'll be back again when I've finished felting this into place. Okay, so I've felted down the nose, and I've also added another 3 layers of that white Shetland wool over the top just to give it a bit more bulk. So you can see it's really started to add some shape to our rabbit's head now. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to add some bunny cheeks to really puff out his face and give him that really super cute bunny look. So I've made some more balls out of the white Shetland core wool that we were using a moment ago, and all I've done is very loosely folded them over to create these kind of very loose circular shapes, and then just felted them down a bit to anchor them into position. So they're really super duper loose. And I'm going to place them either side of his cheeks and then felt them down, so they're about the same size roughly, there or thereabouts. So I'm just going to place the first one. So you want to place it so that it's kind of quite low down, but also so that you can see it once it's all felted into place from the front. So I'm going to place it around about here-ish. So I'm just going to spin him onto his side. And the nice thing about this tutorial is you don't really need to use a mat, because the head's so large, it doesn't really require one. So I'm just going to felt that down using my medium needle still. And there's no wire in this either, which is really nice, so you can be relatively heavy-handed with your needles and not worry about breaking them at all. So again, we want to keep the bulk of this wool central, and then we want to have it sort of gradually dissipate out to the sides and blend in with the rest of the head. Can't think of another word other than dissipate, so if anybody can put something in the comments box about other words I could use. Maybe I need to get on the old thesaurus, Google other words rather than dissipate. Probably better, more descriptive words than that I could be using. So I'm just felting around the edge again, initially, just to anchor it down. And once it's anchored down, then we can start to think about felting the bulk a bit more and getting more shape into it. What I'm going to do though, before I start properly felting it down, I'm going to put the other ball into position. Do you know what I'm just going to move that. I'm going to put it a bit lower. I'm going to put it here. So it was just a bit high then, so I've moved it and I'm repositioning it around here instead. So I'm just going to get it a little bit lower just to get his cheeky chop super cheeky. Just felt that down again. And that's another nice thing, if you kind of felt it down really quickly and go sort of centrally through the wool, it's a lot harder to remove if it's not right. So if you just anchor it down initially around the sides, if it isn't in the right position, you can just move it. I like to keep these little hiccups in my videos, because then if you make a similar mistake when you're making the same thing or something different, you can correct it easily. Okay, so that's looking better. So it does look a bit strange at the moment, but fear not, it will all fall into place. So I'm just going to add my second ball of wool now. I'm just going to try and place it in the similar location to where we placed that first one. So around about here. So I'm just again going to go around the edges. And then again, of course, if it's not quite right in terms of the position, I can just remove it and then felt it back into position again into a different location. It's not a problem. You could use 3 needles for this if you wanted to. I like to stick with 2 because I just find it's a bit easier to penetrate the wool with just 2 needles. But if you wanted to put extra felting power, then you could go with 3. You can get some quite good large handled stabbers as well, but this, I don't think this project is big enough to call for that. I think you can get about 12 needles inside certain needle felting tools, but that's for your very, very large projects, whereas this I would say is a kind of medium to large size project, not humongous. You could make a really large version of this. It would take you quite a long time, but it would be incredibly satisfying once it's done. Just felt that down a bit more. Really focus on the outside edge of the pieces when you're adding them, because in addition to making it easier for yourself to remove them and replace them as you go along, if you need to kind of move it to another location, it also means that you just get this nice even blending between the different sections of wool as well. So I'm just gonna felt that into the nose a bit more. Okay, so you should have something that looks kind of like this. It's a little bit wonky at the moment. It's definitely not perfect, but we're starting to get the shape of our bunny head. So the next thing we want to do is start really felting these two cheeks down a bit more, just so we can get this more integrated into the rest of the sculpture's head. So I'm just going to take my medium needles and felt down the centre, because we left a lot of squidge in this, remember. Wrong needles. We left a lot of squidge in this, remember, so we want to compact that down now. We don't want it to be super duper firm, but we do want it to have a certain amount of firmness to it, so it can't easily be squashed and the shape of it changed. So I'm just going through the middle and taking away some of that bulk that we've added. And it just gives a bit more of a natural look then as well. I'm gonna have to go inside in a minute. It's starting to get dark. I'm pretty sure my neighbours don't want to hear me bleating on about needle felting as well. Get it? Bleating. Feels very fitting that there are sheep buying in this video. Feels almost like I've planned it that way. I haven't planned it that way, but it does feel like it has been. Okay, so that's quite nicely felted down. So I'm just going to do the same on the other side, and I'll be back in a second once they're both felted into position. Okay, so I've felted down the cheeks and we've got the nose in position now as well. So the next thing we need to do is integrate all of this together by placing more wool over the top and just continuing to build on the shape of our rabbit's head. So we really build on that profile when we're looking at it side on, when it's eventually put on the wall. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head on inside now, because it is getting a little bit dark, and I will see you in a moment for the next stage. Good morning, good morning. So I decided to hang fire and continue the tutorial this morning rather than doing it inside last night, just because I think the lighting is a lot better outside rather than doing it in artificial light. So earlier on we added the kind of the snout area for our rabbit, and we also added these little bunny cheeks as well. So what we're going to do in order to integrate everything together is we're going to take a large piece of some white Gotland wool bats now rather than Shetland, and we're going to place it over the entire muzzle and felt that down, just to blend everything together and also give it a little bit more volume again. So I'm going to go back to my wool. So I've got quite a large piece here, and I'm just going to tear some off. We want it to be large enough to cover the lower part of his face, so we want it to kind of go over like this, but I'm going to probably go for, I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. Probably going to go, should I go for another layer? Let's stick with this first and see where it sits, and then we can always add some more in a moment. So I'm going to just move my mat out the way, and I'm going to take my medium needles, and I'm just going to start felting that down into the head of the rabbit. Hello beautiful, how can I help you? Oh Freya, it's beautiful, and you've written your name on it as well. Very pretty.
Alan, 54, King
Oh, you've written everything on it. Wow. Can you tell me what it is you've done?
Yeah.
Tell me what it is you've drawn.
A whippy.
A whippy?
With some sprinkles on.
With some sprinkles on?
I want to put it on some posters, so I'm going to make loads more too.
Okay, sweetie.
With all of this and then an arrow.
Okay, what will the posters be for?
So... Just to make people happy.
Oh, that's a really lovely thing.
But it's also to get us money.
Okay, so apologies for that. Bless her. They're drawing ice creams at the moment, and they're practicing their sprinkles and their chocolate flakes in them. Okay, so what I'm doing, I'm just turning the rabbit on its head, and I'm just felting underneath. And the nice thing is, because it's quite a large size, we can do that with this, as opposed to something smaller where you'd need to hold it on the mat. So what you need to do is, you're felting, what I tend to do is I take my hand and I just push the wool downwards and then felt it into position so it's taut, rather than just felting it loose and not having too much resistance there. Just speeds the process up for you really. And then I'm just going to felt those down underneath and anchor them into place. Okay, so you just want to keep going until everything's nicely anchored down. And then once it's been anchored down, we're just going to go in with the medium needles and just felt this all into position. Okay, so like I said earlier on, so this is a very simple shape to make so far. You've got the initial ball that we made from the washing machine, the larger ball, which is forming the base of the head. Then we've got this section here on the lower half of the ball, which is covering the entirety of it to create that volume. And then you've got these two smaller balls either side, which creates the cheek area for our rabbit. Now, I forgot to say earlier on that the diameter for these balls that I've added were about 4 inches, but decide how big yours are going to be, judging by the size of everything else. So you can gauge roughly how big they need to be just by kind of looking at it. They need to be probably less than a quarter of the size of the ball that you're making, so quite small, an eighth maybe, something like that, but relatively small. And if you start small, you can always build on it as well, so always go less and then add.
Sorry.
Right, was it an accident?
No, purpose.
Right, give her a hug and a kiss. I know you said sorry, and don't do it again. So I'm just going to go in now, and I'll be back in a second once I've felted everything down. Okay, so I've finished felting down the white Gotland wool now, so everything is nicely integrated on the lower half of the rabbit's head. So what we want to do now is we want to add a bit more volume to the top of the head here. The reason we want to do that is because I want to make this rabbit look quite young and childlike. So I want to situate its eyes around here, and by creating more height here, it gives the impression of a more youthful look. If you wanted to make something look older, you would then put the eyes up slightly higher so that you have less sort of extra additional head, if that makes sense. So I'm going to place my eyes around here. So I'm going to take some more white Gotland wool. Just going to tear away some of that excess. So I've got a relatively large piece here. I mean, this will vary depending on the size of what you have already, but mine is 11 inches by 3.5 inches in width. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull it out a little bit so that the width is going down the sides of the head. Okay, so it's not set just on top, because that'll look a bit strange and unnatural. So we want it to blend down to the sides of the head. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to roll it a few times. Twice looks about good. And then I'm just going to place it over the top of my rabbit's head like this. You don't want it to be too thick, because if it's too thick, then what you'll find is you'll get loads of lumps and bumps at the front. We don't want that. We just want to add a bit of additional height. So what you might want to do is just pull the wool a little bit at the sides, so you've got the height in the middle, but it's blending down on the sides so that you can easily blend it in with the rest of the head. So I'm going to hold that in place. Hold it nice and firmly. I'm holding it using my left hand. And then I'm just going to take my medium needles, and whilst I'm holding it super taut, I'm just going to stab it down. Stabbing it down on the sides to anchor it into position. And then once you've anchored it, then you can start working on the centre. Okay, so you want to keep felting this down until it's all nicely integrated into position. I'm going to spin it round, and I'm just going to do the other side. Felt the sides down here as well. And what I like to do is I start about halfway up, and then I go downwards. And by doing this, what you're doing is you're also getting a bit of tension, pulling the wool downwards as well. So as I'm felting, I'm gently pulling to get the tension and bring it down. So I'll come back to you in a second once this is all felted down. Okay, so I've added the top part for the head of our rabbit. So you can see it's really starting to take shape now, and you can see that kind of rabbity look in the head. So the next thing we want to do is we want to cover all of this in white Gotland wool. So we're integrating all of these pieces that we've added together, and also adding a little bit more volume to the head, but distributed evenly across the entire head rather than focusing on one specific area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my head out the way, and I'm going to bring in my brush mat. And here I've got a relatively large piece of the white Gotland wool. And what I've done is I've just stretched it over the rabbit's head to make sure that it kind of fits over the rabbit's head in its entirety. I'm then going to place it on my brush mat, like so. Make sure that you've got equal amounts of wool over the whole piece. There isn't any areas where it's slightly thinner than another, so you get an even finish once it's felted down. I'm going to take my 7 needle multi-tool, and I'm going to felt it onto the brush mat. You can get different sizes of brush mat. I've got quite a small one here, but you could get a larger one to make life easier for yourself. And then it doesn't really, you can use it on all sorts of things. It doesn't matter if you're making smaller things. You've got the space to work with. But I've chosen to make life more difficult for myself by using a small one. Okay, and then I'm just going to flip it over and felt down this side. And the reason that we're doing this is it just speeds the process up for covering the head. You could just put this over the rabbit's head and felt it down like I have done a moment ago. However, it takes a lot longer because you're trying to pull, whereas earlier on with the head we were able to get that nice and taut because we were just working on one area. Because we're working on the whole head of the rabbit and there's lots of lumps and bumps in there now, it's quite difficult to get that tautness. Whereas if we felt this down beforehand and then place it over the top, you're kind of halfway there and you're just making life a lot easier for yourself. The other thing that you're able to do as well is go in with your fine needles rather than the medium needles to get a lovely fine finish, whereas the medium needles you might get a little bit more of an indentation. So that's the method in my madness. And I just think brush mats are just awesome for speeding up any kind of 2D work that you need to do in any sculpture. And we're going to be using them later on to make the ears of our rabbit as well. I think it's probably safe to say that I use my brush mat in every project that I do at some stage. So it's definitely a really good investment. Right, just going to do these sides and I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do the other side. Careful that if you are using a small brush mat that you don't overshoot and you stab into the table, because you don't want to break your needles. So just be aware of where the mat is as you're felting. Felt down these. Don't worry too much about the wispy ends because we can then blend those into the back of the rabbit's head in a moment. This bit's kind of like icing a cake. This is like the icing and then the rabbit head is the cake that you're going to be placing it over. Alright, so you're looking to have a piece of wool that looks like this. So it's all bonded together with your 7 needle multi-tool and it's a nice large piece that we can use to cover all of our rabbit's head. But before we add this, we need to do one very important thing. So you want to be able to hang your rabbit's head on a wall. So what we need to do now is add our craft thread into the rabbit so that we can then hang him and then cover it over with the wool that we've just felted down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my polyamide thread, and the nice thing with this is it's nice and strong because it's used for catching fish and things like that. So it can take a reasonable weight, so we only need to have one single thread going down the back. We don't need to kind of double up or anything like that. I'm going to take my dole needle, and you can get these on Amazon in packs of 3. They're really inexpensive and they're really easy to thread as well because the polyamide's obviously plastic and you've got a nice big eyelet here to put your thread through. So I'm just going to thread that through. And then I'm going to turn my head around, so I'm going to go through where I'm probably wanting to put the eyes, just because that feels like a natural position to have the thread coming sort of in the middle of the back of the head here. So I'm going to take my needle, feed it through. Oh, it's gone a bit awry there. Feed it through. You might need a few attempts just to get the position of needle coming out correctly. Come on, there we go. That's pretty good. So bring that through as far as it can go, and then I like to leave about this much, and I'm just going to tie a knot in it. And you don't need to go too crazy with the knot because you've got a lot of wool here to kind of act as a barrier to stop this from coming out the other side. So I'm probably just going to go for a triple knot, just to be on the safe side, but like I said, you probably don't need to go for triple if you don't feel like you need to. There we go. And then I'm just going to snip the end off, and then I'm just going to pull that through like so, nice and tight. Then I'm going to take my needle again and I'm going to thread it back through the other side. We want to come out roughly where the eye is going to be. Because the needle's so long, it kind of does its own thing. There we are. So thread that through, and you want to pull it as tight as you can at this stage. Try and get it really super duper tight, because there's going to be a little bit of slack when you tie the knot in. So try and keep it pulled as tight as possible. And then I'm just going to tie that knot. You don't want it to be loose, because when it hangs, then you're going to have the polyamide thread shooting up over the top of the rabbit's head, and we don't want that because that just looks ugly. We want to create the illusion that this is this has just been shot by Elmer Fudd. Okay, that's one knot. Let's go for another one. Oops, cocked that up, or did I? Oh no, I didn't. That's right. I'm just going to go for one more. Feed it through. Keep it nice and taut. There we go, perfect. So I've got a little bit of slackness here to hang it, but not too slack, okay? So it's hanging quite nicely there. So I'm going to cut that excess away, like so. Get rid of that, and then I'm going to take the sheet we've just felted, and then I'm going to place it evenly over our rabbit's head. And then I'm going to take my medium needles again, and I'm just going to go round the sides initially. We're going to go in with our fine needles in a moment, but I just want to tack everything down securely with the medium needles prior to doing more of the finishing work, if that makes sense. So all the way around. And of course we're going to be needing to put more wool over the back later, but let's just focus on the front for the moment, and then we can work on the back once that's done. And all that's going to be a case of is just covering it with white wool, so it's dead simple. So as you felt it down, just be cautious that you don't end up with any kind of folds or ruching. You want to make sure that you're pushing it nice and taut, as if you're icing a cake, and then carefully just felting down those little folds that occur as you pull it over the head. So what I'm going to do now I've done the top half, I'm just going to do a bit more on this side. Get it tacked down securely. So what I'm going to do now I've tacked the top half, I'm going to go straight down the middle of the bottom half. I'm not going to take it from one side to the other, because what will happen, what inevitably happens, is that all this gets pushed round, and then you end up with a big clump of wool here at the end, which is it's a pain in the ass to get rid of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the middle and just felt that down. Okay, and then to turn it, and then we're going to felt down the middle of that corner that's exposed, like that. And then do the same thing, there's a little bit of excess there that I'm going to get rid of, and then do the same thing on the other side. So what we're doing here is we're just evenly dispersing the wool so we don't end up with that ugly ruching and any lumps and bumps. So then I'm going to go back to this side, and I'm going to felt down the middle of that corner we've made, and then I'm turning it around this side, and I'm going to go down the middle of these two pieces and this one, like so. And once you've got to the stage where you've got these 4 folds, then you can take your needles side by side and just felt them down into the back of the rabbit's head, like this. And you just get a nice even finish then to the piece that you've just added. So we're kind of halfway there now, and I'm going to felt this down more in a moment, but you can see that by adding the wool as a sheet that's already felted as opposed to adding it loosely, you're kind of cutting your felting time down a lot because you've already got this really lovely smooth base to work with. So all we need to do now is get it adhered to the wool underneath. So I'm going to move to my fine needles now, and I'm just going to start felting this into place. I'm just going to start along the eye area where we're going to have the eye sitting, and then the nose there as well. So I'll come back to you in a second once I've felted all this down, and you can see how it looks once it's all felted into place. Okay, so we've now added that sheet of felt, and I felted it down using a combination of my medium needles and then my fine needles to kind of do the finer frontal detail of the rabbit. Now it's still looking a bit rough and ready, it's not completely smooth yet, but that's absolutely fine because we're going to continue to felt it and shape it as we go along. But the next thing that we need to do is we need to think about adding his nose onto his face, and we always add the nose first because then that gives us a really good guide as to where the eyes are going to sit the most naturally. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my head out of the way, and I'm going to bring in my brush mat, and I've got some flesh coloured merino wool bats here. It's New Zealand merino, which measures 9 inches by about 1.5 inches. And we're going to make quite a large triangle here. So I'm going to take the wool, get rid of those excess bits. I'm going to take the wool over my left hand, holding it in my right, and I'm going to turn it so that we have this smooth edge here. And if you've watched my mouse tutorial, it's exactly the same process as making the mouse's nose, but just on a larger scale. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to turn this pink wool over, so you've got an angle here. And then I'm going to take the other angle, so this top part here, I'm going to bring it down to meet this other corner, so then we've got this triangular shape. Then I'm going to fold it over itself. Then I'm going to bring it over the corner, and then this corner. And then I'm going to tear away that excess. I'm just going to bring that round the front, and I'm just going to take my fine needles, and I'm just going to felt that down and anchor it into place initially. It's a bit breezy out here this morning. It's beautiful, but it's not very good when you've got little bits of wool hanging around. So using your nails so that you're not going to be stabbing yourself. So you always kind of, almost like a claw-like shape I like to use. So I can't stab myself in the fingers. But you could use finger gloves as well. The only thing I don't like about finger gloves, and some people may disagree with me, but I find them a bit cumbersome. So when you're trying to do finer detail work, I mean, this isn't too bad, but if you're doing a very small nose, it's quite hard to get hold of it and hold it in place. Whereas obviously using the needles without finger gloves is much easier from a kind of dexterity point of view, but then obviously you're running the risk more so of stabbing yourself. But that's why I use this kind of claw shape when I'm holding things down. So once I've got that kind of shape going, that triangular shape, I'm just going to soften those corners a little bit, so it's not completely triangular and it looks a bit more natural, a bit more nose shaped. And then we'll have a look in a second and just see how this size sits on our rabbit's head. A bit more over the corners here, just to soften them a little bit more. And then we can do a bit more felting once it's in place on our head. Okay, so you've got something that looks like this, and this is measuring, so from the point to the flat part it's 1.5 inches, and then across it's just under 1.5 inches, I'd say 1.25 inches, and then the sides are measuring about 1.25 inches as well. So I'm just going to move my mat out of the way and bring my rabbit head back in. So now we need to think about where we want to place this nose. I reckon that's a good position. So I'm placing it so that I've got about 1 inch of the slope here, and then I've got the rest of the mouth coming down here because we want to be able to add our mouth in later as well. We don't want it up here because that doesn't look very natural. I mean, we don't want it down here either because again it just looks a bit strange, although if he was looking downwards that would probably work, but he's not going to be looking downwards, he's going to be looking at us. So I reckon about here is a nice natural position for the nose to go. So I'm just going to turn him round, and like we did previously, I'm going to use my single twisted fine needles, and we're going to felt down the sides first of all, making sure that this is all nice and central. You don't want him to have a wonky donkey nose. So felt down the sides. Just checking it and making sure it's looking nice and even. And then once it's locked into position, I'm just going to felt down the middle. Don't worry too much about getting this really firmly felted down, and you'll see why in a second, but we're going to do some additional things to lock it into place. Okay, so there's the nose felted into place. What I'm going to do now, I just want it to be a little bit bigger, so I'm just going to add a bit more pink wool over the top and felt that over the top using my fine needles. So I just want it to be a bit larger in terms of its spread on the face. So I'm just going to take my needles. So what I'm doing, I'm just going to felt round the edges first of all, lock those into position. Felt down the middle a bit, and you can do this too. So if you think, oh, actually it might be a bit small, I don't think it's too small. I just personal preference, I just want it to be a bit larger. I'm just felting that down, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold these frilly bits over, but just let them overlap slightly onto the white, so we're making a slightly larger area for our nose to spread over. And then the same on this side. Folding it over, back onto itself, and then felting it and shaping it into position. I'm just felting down those sides, and I'm kind of pushing them inwards into the nose. So where you've got the join between the white and the pink, I'm felting into that gap there just to kind of tidy any looseness away. And then just back through the top. And I'm just pushing quite deeply with my needles here around the top side, just so I'm making sure that the pink wool and the white wool are felting down into each other. Perfect, so it should look something like this now. Just checking for symmetry and making sure this looks all even. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is we want to add a kind of muzzle to our rabbit. So we're going to be creating 2 additional triangles similar in size, and we're going to be placing them at the sides here. So I'm going to go back to my white wool, and I'm going to go back to my brush, and I'm going to go back to my felting mat. So I'm going to take 2 even strips. Don't worry about measuring the length because we can kind of pull off any additional length that's too much as we go along. So these are about 1.5 inches in width. You want a reasonable amount. This is probably about 12 inches in length, but we're not going to need all of this. And we're going to do the same thing that we did a moment ago with the pink. We're just going to create that edge, fold it over on an angle so you've got that kind of triangular shape, and then fold it down again so you've got that little triangle there. I'm going to fold it over, and then I think I'm going to fold it one more time. So I'm just going to felt that down, lock it into position so it can't unravel. And I'm going to do the same thing with this one. So fold it over, straight edge, fold over the corner. So 1, 2, 3, ooh, it's gone a bit wonky, 3 and 4, and I think that's enough. And just have a feel of them both and just make sure that they both feel roughly the same thickness as well, because you don't want one to be thicker than the other, but you want them to be thick enough so that you're creating this kind of muzzle-like shape. And then what we're going to do is we're going to place these pieces that we've just made under our nose, like so, to create that muzzle-like shape for our rabbit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this one. We're going to put this one into place first. So you're using the larger flat part of the triangular shape to go against the side of the nose. So the point is pointing on an angle downwards. And then I'm going to take my fine needles and I'm going to felt down the sides. And then felting down the side of this larger, flatter area here so that it's butting against that pink nose that we've just added. There we go. And then the same on the other side. Okay, so now you've added that first triangle, we're going to add the second triangle into place. So I'm just going to place it again, butting up against the pink nose we've just added, and then use my fine twisted needles to felt that down into position. So I'll be back in a second once this is felted into place. Yeah, good. Okay, so I've felted both of my triangles into position now. This one's a little bit larger, but I'm not too worried about that because I can either add a bit more wool to this one or I can felt this down a little bit more and get it the same size. So the next thing I want to do is I want to now cover this with some more white wool, but we're not going to go with loads of white wool. We're just going to take some small strips of the white Gotland so that it's almost opaque like this, and then we're going to place it so that it comes over the nose, the muzzle, and then comes a little bit over the sides as well. So I'm just going to place a little bit more over this side so we've got an even amount. And don't worry, it's not going to completely cover up the pink of the nose we've added, but what it is going to do, it's going to mute that pink and make it look more natural. So I'm just going to again start from the sides with my fine needles and then felt this wool over the top. And you'll find that you need to probably add at least 3 to 4 layers of this kind of thickness to really integrate this part of the face into the rest of the rabbit's head that we've created. Just felt around those sides so you're kind of pulling all this downwards. But you want this part here to look like it's blending really naturally, which is why we probably need to go in and add a few layers of wool to get that natural look. And then once that bit's added, I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab some more of my white wool, splay it out slightly so it's not too thick, and do the same thing again. Just layer it, and you want to have about anywhere between ½ inch and 1 inch of excess over the sides so that it can be blended in nice and neatly. So take my needles again and felt that over. Okay, so that's the second layer of the white Gotland wool that I've added. So I want to add a third layer, but this time, rather than adding the wool over the nose as well, I'm just going to focus on adding it over the muzzle because I don't really want to kind of cover up that pink much more than I already have. So I'm just going to place it just a bit lower so that it's just focusing on that muzzle area, and then we can always bring this down to sort of prevent the pink from being covered over any further. So I'm just going to go in again, felting down the sides. And then when we get to the pink, I'm just going to use my needles to push this down and then push that into the crease that we've created between the pink nose and the muzzle. And then again, felting around those sides and integrating the muzzle into the rest of the head. Spin it round. Okay, so that's the third piece that I've added. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to add one more piece. This is going to be my fourth. And again, I'm going to focus this more on the muzzle rather than the nose. So I'm just going to get rid of that annoying bit of grass that's been left in there. And again, I'm just making sure that the wool goes past the muzzle so that it can be neatly integrated into the rest of the face. So I'll be back in a second once I've felted that down. Right, so the muzzle has been added and it's all been blended in. I may go for a bit more blending later on, but for the time being, I'm happy with that, and it's all nicely fixed into place so it's not going anywhere. So now that we've got our nose into place, what we want to do now is think about where we want to place his eyes. And the best way I find to do this is to press with your fingers or your thumbs into the area where you think the eyes would sit naturally, and then just check it and see if you think that that works. So I'm just going to spin him around so I can look at his face. So by pushing my thumbs in here, I think his eyes will sit nicely just here, as you can see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin him round, and I'm actually going to add a third needle into my medium needle pen. So this is another medium twisted needle that I'm adding. And the best way to add them into the pen whilst I'm doing this is I like to lift it, and then rather than trying to find the hole, I just lift it up and drop it, and usually it's not going to work today. There we go, it falls into place without me having to try and find the hole. So then I just pop the end back on top, and then where I've made those indentations, I'm going to, with my 3 needles, felt a little eye socket for our rabbit. And the same on the other side. I just want to make sure also that they're symmetrical, because we don't want one eye to be sort of slightly deviating from the other. And it's not too bad with smaller projects, but you really do notice it with larger projects, I found. So it's important that we try and get them as even as possible. So just keep checking your work all the time, looking at it from a distance, just to make sure that everything is looking even Stevens. So you want to spend quite a while doing this. You want to get a relatively large eye socket in place. And that's because what we don't want with our sculpture is it to look linear or 2D. We want to have some shape and structure to it, so it looks, whilst it's not looking like a real rabbit that you'd see in a field, it does have that realism to it, almost kind of like, I like to think of a lot of my work as being inspired by all the Jim Henson puppets from the 80s and the 90s. I think that was the golden era for kids films, all the puppetry and things like Labyrinth and stuff like that. Absolutely loved all that stuff, and that's where I get a lot of my inspiration from when I'm making my sculptures, is that kind of magical, mystical whimsy that you used to get from all those Henson puppets back in the day. I remember there's a fantastic film on Amazon, and it tends to only be on at Christmas, called The Christmas Toy, and I remember watching that when I was probably about 5 on Christmas Eve, and just being completely in awe of this amazing film with all these puppets coming to life. It's basically the precursor to Toy Story. All the toys, if you've not seen it, all these puppets come to life in this children's bedroom, and there's the protagonist in it is Rugby Tiger, and he's a bit of a narcissist. He sees the error of his ways in the end. But anyway, if you get a chance to watch it at Christmas, it's very good. My children really enjoy it. I probably enjoy it more than they do though, because I'm a sucker for a bit of melancholy. Okay, so I'm just using my thumbs as I'm felting this down to just press it in a bit more to really create some shape. And then just go back in again. I want to make quite a large eye, because I think a nice large eye again creates that lovely youthful look. I don't know if you've seen my fish tutorial, but very much like the fish tutorial, where we're creating these lovely big eyes for our characters. It just makes them look super duper cute. It can be a bit of arm work doing this because you've got quite a lot of wool compacted from where you've got your ball that you've made initially, but it's worth it to get that lovely shape. Just a bit more. And you want the bottom of the eye to sit at the top of where the cheeks start. So we've got these nice full cheeks, and then what we can do then is once the eyes are in place, we can start adding some laughter lines and things like that to our rabbit's eyes, although you know his head's stuck on a wall, so whether he's got anything to laugh about is another matter. But you know, we can pretend that he died happy. He was in fits of laughter when he was shot by Elmer Fudd. You could have some fun with this, and you could even do some kind of slightly disturbed eyes, like he's looking at the huntsman just as the bullet hits him. It's a bit dark, isn't it? Right. How's that looking? I'm just going to get a little bit more depth, and then I think we're going to be good to go. Okay, there you have it. So there are our little eye sockets. So the next thing we want to do is we want to grab some brown wool to create the eyes.